good afternoon, good evening. If everybody can drop their locations into the chat, I always love this feature because we get to see where everybody is. And I know there's a reason to be saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to October's Under the Hood of Menopause event. I am so excited to be here with these incredible panelists and my co-host, Amy Danielson-Paul. I'm Elizabeth Elfenbein, the founder and CEO of Under the Sisterhood, a social impact company that sees, hears, acknowledges, and celebrates women. At the core of our company is story sharing through podcasts, through vlogs, through our Under the Hood of Women's Health platform, and through our Under the Hood events every month. And the idea here is to share stories that will inspire change. So I couldn't be more delighted to be having this much needed conversation. Our mission is to build a global community where women's health and well-being are strengthened through sisterhood. And one of the comments that has been made to me quite a bit from one of our advisors and a friend, I would call her, is that what I love about this company is that it's intergenerational. It's intergenerational and it's intersectional. And I think it's really important to highlight that because as women, we go through all these different experiences through our life that start when we're girls, young girls, and as we evolve into women. And we don't realize that one thing affects the next that affects the next when it comes to our health, when it comes to every aspect of our life. So I think ensuring that we're intergenerational is really crucial to us. We want to address all cultures, all backgrounds, and all ages. And I'm really excited about that because it gives us a really safe and wonderful forum to have these conversations. So I'm delighted to get under the hood tonight of menopause. We'll be looking at the many stages from perimenopause to postmenopause. And I'm going to hand it over to Amy to introduce our wonderful panelists.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Before we introduce our amazing group of women, I would love to know where we are all at in our life stage as women. So we're here to celebrate the menopause years, which starts with perimenopause. I'll raise my hand. That's me. I'm sure we have some others in the room too that are in this time frame. And so if you are in your perimenopause years, drop a 1 in the chat. We're gonna have a little fun with this. Mm-hmm. And if you are in your menopause years, drop a 2. And if you are in your post-menopause, let's drop a 3. We have a mix. 1s and 3s, mostly. Okay, interesting. If you have an answer, don't be shy. Or you might be reproductive years. Yeah. Okay, thank you everyone for contributing to that. I'd love to introduce our panel of women now. We have Dr. Taniqua Miller. Dr. Taniqua Miller is a board-certified OBGYN and women's health physician. She's an empowerment coach and NAMS certified menopause and midlife health expert. She is the founder of Revival, a menopause telemedicine company. Dr. Miller trained in psychology at Yale University and earned her medical degree from Harvard Medical School before completing her residency training in gynecology at the University of Virginia. She was on faculty for over a decade at Emory University and Emory Health Systems. And she's been in practice for over 15 years and is committed to empowering women in their midlife journey through education and community. Welcome back, Dr. Miller. Dr. Chris Creatura is an NAMS certified menopause expert, sex educator, and reproductive freedom advocate. She's the founder and owner of her private practice of gynecology, menopause, and sexual medicine, and is a clinical assistant professor of obstetrics. This word is getting me today.
Say OBGYN.
OBGYN at Weill Cornell Medical College and the only full-time NYC-based gynecologic fellow in female sexual medicine, certified by the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health. Dr. Creatura received her medical degree from Harvard Medical School and her residency training at New York Presbyterian Hospital, Weill Cornell. Welcome, and happy to have you here with us. Denise Pines is a women's advocate who sits at the intersection of women's health, technology, and film. She is an advocate for age empowerment and community health who stands at the forefront of midlife wellness for women. Denise co-founded Tea Botanics after her experience with hot flashes, introducing a line of teas for menopause. She founded Wise Pause Wellness, a platform dedicated to pro-aging health and education. And she is the executive producer of The M Factor, a menopause film that is releasing this Thursday. She's also the president of the Osteopathic Medical Board of California. Welcome and happy to have you here with us, Denise. Dixie Lincoln-Nichols is a science and health educator with over 25 years of experience. She's an entrepreneur, consultant, and a passionate advocate for women's wellness. She holds an MSED in teaching and learning, and her love, passion, and expertise have led her to partner with several wellness and lifestyle brands. She's an innovative founder of a former award-winning indie beauty and wellness retailer. Dixie is also the co-founder of Life in the Pause, a platform with a mission to transform the menopause journey into an empowered and celebrated experience. Welcome, Dixie. Happy to have you here with us as well.
So we're so excited to get under the hood of menopause today. We have such an interesting group of women, menopause experts in different capacities. If it's okay, we're going to get started with Dr. Miller. And, I love this question when it comes to you because we've been having many discussions around menopause. Dr. Miller and I, as both a NAMS certified menopause specialist and a midlife health coach, you bring a unique combination, if you will, of medical expertise, the clinical side, and holistic guidance to your patients. How have you seen the dynamics between your roles as a physician, a clinician, and a coach influence the care you provide? And one additional thought to this, in your experience, how does this dual approach impact the way patients navigate the physical, emotional, and mental aspects of menopause?
This was such a great question because obviously I went to medical school and had really little experience with coaching as an art. I think of it. My experience with coaching came from my own experience with professional burnout. I was an academic physician working in a system that I felt very oppressed by, and I really felt like I was burnt out. I didn't really have the language then, but worked with a career coach that helped me see the patterns of thoughts, how that was enabling me in my relationships, whether it was at home or in my workplace. And it really was what inspired me to start asking myself the question, what it is that I wanted, what do I want? And that led me to resigning from that academic position, which is, you can imagine, being in academic medicine, it's kind of heralded as the premier. That's what you do after you finish your training. And I left. I mean, I was the double Ivy League high achieving person and I completely quit. I became a quitter. And I felt so empowered by that because I finally was answering the question, what do I want? What is my goal? What is my purpose for what I want truly, truly? And so I became a coach. I went through coach training. I started working specifically with Black women who were high achieving, highly motivated, but were professionally burnt out. But then I started noticing in my coaching practice and the frameworks that I built that I was using those same tools and those same frameworks on the women that I was caring for in my clinic, really working with them as they are kind of going through life, and midlife kind of like stops you in your tracks. I think for so many of us, we wear lots of different roles that are assumed in our society as daughters and mothers and spouses. And we're going about life kind of on autopilot. And then when you experience that first hot flash, or that first outburst, and you don't know why you're going off on the kids, and you don't feel sexy anymore, and you can't think of the word where you parked your car, it literally stops you in your tracks. And it's very disembodying. And a lot of women are kind of, I call it the midlife reckoning or midlife awakening, starts to happen. And so while I was seeing people physically for their symptoms, it wasn't a complete assessment of where they were in their lives as they were battling with this restlessness of what I consider the midlife burnout. And so by combining coaching and really helping them see their thoughts and really changing their thought patterns and building new beliefs about what's possible in this new phase of life that if you have ovaries, you will experience about a third of your lifetime in. How do we then make it a journey of empowerment? Because I tell people I can pickle you in estrogen. I'm talking about creams, potions, elixirs. But if we don't get to the heart of what drives you, what gives you purpose as a human being in this world, you're not going to make it through this transition successfully or in a way that embodies who you are at your core. So, bringing those two skills together have really been invaluable. In fact, I had a client who said, you could have given me all of the meds and I would have been fine. Like physically, yeah, I'm sleeping better and everything. But there was just this like raw restlessness and turning point in my life at that moment that I needed to just see the world differently. And in her example, she is succession planning for her business. She's going to be moving abroad and starting on new projects. And it's like, yes, that is finally answering the question for her, what do I want in this midlife?
No, I love that. That is so interesting. And I think that just that ability, because it is such a weird, like to your point of the coaching side and you're feeling the burnout, but then there's the side of you that is literally going through these physical symptoms. I didn't even know that. I couldn't find my car. I thought that was my autoimmune thing. So, but it was probably perimenopause. But anyway, I think it's really interesting. And I think it's when we look at where healthcare is today, it's really novel. It's a new approach to treating and really dealing with patients. We'll circle back to you. We're going to go and we're going to ask Dr. Creatura. What I love about this juxtaposition between Dr. Miller and Dr. Creatura is they both attended Harvard Medical School 20 years apart, which means a lot of things changed in life. A lot of things happened. And so I think Dr. Creatura, with over 30 years of being a NAM certified expert, you've in gynecology, of course, in OBGYN to start, you've guided countless women through the menopausal journey throughout your career. What are the most significant shifts that you've observed in how menopause is understood, is discussed, and really managed? And then I'll ask you the next question after. I'll let you.
Okay. So, I mean, I think actually what's interesting is probably there's a lot that hasn't changed in that time. Dr. Miller, I think that we'd like to hope that there's been a great improvement. But what I really feel right now about this moment is that I've always been interested in how hormones, I've been interested in hormones and how they affect people's behavior for my whole career. But I feel really excited right now because I feel that there's a cultural moment and a more public interest in the endocrine transitions that I've been dealing with for decades. Because I don't think of menopause as being actually a menopause and a post-menopause. I really think of it as an endocrine transition. And it is one of the three major neuroendocrine transitions that occur in a woman's life. And it's actually the only one that really doesn't evoke a lot of wonder, right? And puberty can be exciting for people. Everyone loves to talk about pregnancy, but not everyone really wants to talk that much about menopause. It's definitely not finite, it's a continuum. And I think that now, because women are really demanding better care, I think we're really recently acknowledging that medical misinformation, even gender disinformation, is really harming us. And I really believe that that comes from us as a culture being so habituated to women suffering that we don't address the health issues that don't affect men. And since men control most of the resources and don't experience 2/3 of the endocrine transitions, it really is a gender equality issue. It's not just confined to disinformation about menopause. It's also encompassing contraception and abortion, pregnancy, and all of its attendant morbidity. And it ultimately leads us to the last third of our lives in which we really need informed practitioners and nuanced, personalized conversations about risks and prevention. But the information that people need really hasn't been prioritized. There's a big gender gap in resources and in research that I'm hoping we will close in the next 20 years, because I don't think it changed that much in the 20 years between us. I think that like the idea that menopause is natural and never needs to be treated as archaic as presuming that it's preferable to be pregnant most of one's reproductive life and never control when we choose to reproduce. I think that the most common barrier to treatment is really a belief that symptoms should be accepted as a natural part of aging, despite the negative impact on our quality of life and disease. And the second biggest impediment is fear. And that really arises from the kind of gender disinformation that I'm talking about.
So that's really interesting. I mean, I guess that gets into the cultural perception. So I guess, have you seen advancements in medical treatments, cultural perceptions, or patient empowerment change the way, your patients experience this life stage of menopause? And how has that influenced the way you treat today? Because to your point, and we've been having conversations, Dr. Creatura and I, about the fact that she has been in this space for nearly 40 years. And so seeing the cultural dynamics, and, any sort of advancements, would.
It's slow, but remember, I trained in the 80s when many more women were actually offered menopausal hormone therapy. And well into the 90s, I found that many women were still unaware of the preventive benefits of treating menopause. Around the time that the WHI study came out in 2002, and the findings are misinterpreted by the media and the FDA, and unfortunately, lots of medical providers, I had already transitioned most of my patients into using transdermal estradiol. And by the mid-aughts, I was using testosterone when it was indicated. So I was practicing evidence-based medicine, but I was often swimming upstream when it came to convincing my patients and my colleagues that the overall health benefits mostly outweigh the risks. So I can talk about the WHI briefly if people are interested, but I'm going to try to do it fast because I get tired of talking about it. I think that everyone should know that the patients who were in the WHI were actually mostly remote from menopause. They were older. An inclusion criterion was that they were not symptomatic, and the regimen was studied was only conjugated oral estrogen and synthetic medroxyprogesterone acetate. And this was the drug that was the most widely prescribed at that time, but they were not the ideal delivery systems and not the ideal molecules. And the patients were not representative of the typical women that were suffering from menopausal symptoms. So that said, the WHI study wasn't a bad one. It just suffered from a lot of misinterpretation. I never changed my prescribing practices based on the WHI, but the resistance after it came out was tremendous. And as a result, a lot of women have suffered unnecessarily. So now I feel a little vindicated as well as liberated by the public reexamination of how poorly we've treated women. And I'm pleased that there are so many good communicators, like all the people here today, that are getting the message out that hormones are not bad for you. And for most people, actually, treating with hormones not only relieves suffering, it prevents disease, and it's correlated with a decrease in all-cause mortality. That means a decreased risk of dying of anything, which is so important. We got to counterbalance all the fear mongering with the reality of improved quality of life and decreased all-cause mortality. So we're not where we should be. I think the medical profession and the public are finally understanding that women with distressing menopausal symptoms like vasomotor symptoms and sleep and mood disruption, brain fog, cardiovascular symptoms, joint pain, genitourinary complaints, sexual distress, hypertension, cholesterol elevation, muscle weakness, and metabolic shifts are all regulated by the decline in ovarian function. Menopause is just endocrine aging, and it can be decelerated with the correct use of hormones.
Well, I have to answer that because back in the day, guys, Dr. Creatura, when I was going through perimenopause, was my physician. And I also happened to work in a health and wellness agency that actually worked on Premarin when the studies came out. And I'm like, I'm not putting hormones in my body. And that study scared me to death. I was like, you know what? I'm going to suffer quietly, not knowing. And you were very kind. You educated me well, but I was like, yep, nope, not going there. Things aren't that bad, which in, when I think about the fact that deceleration, I feel so, well, it is what it is. I don't live in the past, but when I think about it, this is great for women today who are going through this experience. So thank you for that. There's so much to unpack there. I wouldn't even know where to begin, but I think it does give us all a pause to really think about where we are with menopause and the things we need, and to be able to have a voice for that. I'm going to move over to Denise now. Denise, you are so multi-layered and faceted, but you're debuting the film The M Factor on Thursday. So on 2 days, you've been the executive producer on that. What is your experience like in bringing this, a film around menopause to life? And what do you hope for the viewers from a key takeaway perspective?
Sure. So this journey of doing this film started about 4 years ago. I said that I wanted to do a film on menopause. I wanted to be the first person to market to do a film on menopause. So just a little background, I've been in the entertainment business for about 30 years. So, here we are in fact doing the first film on menopause that is coming through the US. But a series of realities sort of hit me along the way of doing this film. First, it was getting distribution. So 2 years ago is when I actually went out talking to streamers about it. Most of them ran me out of their office saying, well, who's going to watch that? And I said, my response was like, half the world, because women are half the world and all women are going to go through menopause, but they really didn't get it. So then the next hurdle was funding. I mean, I could not get funding from all of these companies that are trying to sell women menopausal things like disposable diapers, hormone tests, supplements, and even the company that did 2 Super Bowl ads. So when you consider what to buy, consider these companies in terms of, are they really totally committed to getting women to understand? And also, are they committed to educating even our physician population, right? And then finally, as we got into doing the film, the real lack of research. I mean, in a word, it was honestly unreal. This is my 13th documentary. So research is typically where I always start with a doc. And we were operating off of data that was 12 to 15 years old. It made me realize how little we really know about menopause, including all of the treatment options and how we can improve even the treatment options that we currently have. So for example, we were simply trying to find a stat on how many women are using hormone replacement therapy, so HRT. The last data point was 4%, and that was 12 years ago. And then recently, the Menopause Society on September 10th of this year came out with a new stat, and it was very alarming. That stat said that now, so 4% were using it 12 years ago, but now it dropped to 1.8% who are in perimenopause were using HRT. So we need to know why. And therein lies sort of the next thing, and that is the need for more research. So the experience in producing the film was like a myriad of challenges. I mean, we overcame them. We ended up getting funders for the film, Delta Dental, Andrea Cohen, and some others actually stepped up and stepped in. But this is the reality of where we are. We are having a movement. It's beyond a moment. We're not going to put the genie out of the bag. Women need to go to their doctors and advocate for themselves to put it in front, even if they don't have a darn thing they can help you with. The pressure that women can mount on the healthcare system will change the healthcare system in terms of addressing this with them. So the takeaways is one, the cost of silence. The cost of silence is delay in care. And Dr. Creatura just talked about that. Unnecessary suffering. Women are, we sort of believe that we're supposed to suffer. And when we get to this moment, it's just sort of an add-on, like, okay, of course, I'll suffer through this, right? So that the second is the workplace needs to catch up. Half the women working in the workplace are over the age of 45. So we need to support these women to continue to be productive in the workplace. So the workplace needs to catch up. And then just really, I think the next takeaway is knowledge is empowerment. And then the more women understand what their options are, whatever you decide, whether it's hormone therapy, whether holistic remedies, lifestyle changes, the more they feel empowered, the more they'll be able to take control of their health and their well-being. So those are like the takeaways that I'm hoping people have after they watch this film.
Thank you so much for that. I love the fact that we have to unsilence. And I know the big phrase with the M Factor film has been about shedding the light. around menopause. But I think that women advocating for ourselves in every stage, whether it's in the peri, whether it's once we suddenly stop getting after a year our periods, and then post, there's so many different facets of the post, in terms of just taking care of ourselves. So I think that's really wonderful. And I'm really excited to see the film. So I will stay tuned for Thursday. We're going to move on to Dixie. You've had an amazing career teaching biology and science, being an indie retailer. You founded Life in the Pause a few years ago. And, really, I think it would be wonderful for the audience to hear what your turning point was that led you to take on the mission to focus on menopause. And how has this impacted you as a woman, but also women, because you have such a tremendous, the ripple effect, if you will?
Right. Great question. Life in the Pause began back in 2020 during the pandemic. My business partner and I, we were meeting to talk about a project that had nothing to do with menopause, and we were meeting every Wednesday. And without fail, every Wednesday, we were sharing our menopausal experiences with one another. Like, what are you experiencing? How are you feeling? Why are you feeling like this? Who is helping you? Who can you turn to? And all of the questions we had, we addressed them every Wednesday. So it was like we were donating an hour of our time out of this meeting to talk about menopause. And that went on for 2 years. And we met almost every Wednesday, and every Wednesday we had something to talk about. And we also started noticing that there weren't many women talking about menopause who looked like us. There weren't many Black women talking about their experiences with menopause. We each also had to talk about what we experienced with our own physicians when it came to menopause. I had a terrible experience with a doctor. I was about to remove my uterus because I had uterine fibroids, and I was experiencing some angst. And she said to me, well, I don't know why women are so attached to their uterus, especially if they're not going to have children. And that turned me off. I did not have the surgery, and I embarked on this journey for natural healing, just to figure out how I wanted my body to feel. And I just shied away from doctors. I eventually found the healing that I felt like I needed. But we realized no one was talking to us specifically. And that when those fibroids started when I was 38, it was because I was in perimenopause. And none of my doctors even made the connection that my fluctuating hormones was a result of perimenopause. And so I went through many years of not having any idea that I was actually in menopause. Now, as a teacher, I knew of menopause, but I'll tell you something, even when you are a teacher and an advocate and your body starts to change and these symptoms start coming at you left and right, you don't make the connection immediately. And so we thought, well, there must be so many women out there who are experiencing what we're experiencing, and they're not in complete awareness of what's happening to their bodies. How do we talk to them? How do we communicate with the women like ourselves? How do we form a community so that we can share stories, we can share resources, we can tap into people who know more than we do, and then bring that back to our community? And so Life in the Pause was created because of that need. And we had our first conference last year, our first festival. We call it a festival because we wanted to empower women, not just with education and community, but we also wanted to celebrate this transition. Right? It's been a gloom and doom situation for many people. And a lot of people approach it with a very pessimistic attitude. And I understand why that is, because of the lack of information and the lack of support. But we wanted to feel empowered. And so we decided, listen, we're going to create this festival and we're going to bring women together, professionals, experts, and we're going to bring the woman, your everyday woman who's experiencing menopause, who doesn't have anyone to turn to, who needs to be in community with other women. Because another thing we realized during our discussions was that so many women are experiencing menopause in a silo. They are not talking to their family members, they're not talking to their partners, they're not talking to their children, they're not talking to their coworkers, they're not talking to anyone. And they are experiencing these symptoms, a lot of them very debilitating, right? It's like from mild to moderate to extreme. And so many women are experiencing menopause alone and in pain. And so we wanted to create this space that will help them to be resourced and help them to celebrate and just transform the experience into an empowered one. So Life in the Pause is community. It's all about community. It's all about learning. And it's all about, like you're saying, like your company, it's all about sisterhood.
I just love that. I think that, we've been having conversations. I'm really struck by community at a time like this when we are feeling physically so many different feelings. The symptomology that we get from a menopause, whether it's a peri, whether it's, post, all the different things you physically feel. And we kind of separate and we don't think about the emotional ramifications. So the notion of really creating this community, bringing women together, the celebration of this phase. And I have to tell you, I'm post-menopause and I am loving life. I am loving life. I am living in the pause. So thank you for that. I love that saying because it really is wonderful. I'm going to hand it over to Amy, everybody, who is going to actually we'll open up the questions, if you will.
Yeah, so we have some questions that came into the chat. So I'm just going to start back up at the top. We have one for Dr. Taniqua Miller. And if I bring up your question and you want to, open up your mic, that's totally okay. This is from Galaxy AO2. Galaxy AO2 would like to know, what can she do to regrow her hairline? And Taniqua, do you have any suggestions? And anybody here on the panel, if you have something to contribute, please.
So we do see female pattern hair loss as a function of declining estrogen levels. And so you'll notice that the parts on the side, even like middle parts, even the density of the hair itself, the hair follicle itself will get thinner. We do know that declining estrogen levels can contribute to that. But interestingly, starting estrogen doesn't necessarily increase the hair growth pretty quickly. It actually can cause further shedding of the hair before you see growth just because of the life cycle of the hair follicle. So usually if we're starting hormone therapy in the backdrop of other problematic symptoms like hot flashes, night sweats, mood changes, then sometimes that's enough. But frankly, we just had our Menopause Society meeting and there was a lovely dermatologist that he spoke about, no, there are medications that can directly address hair loss, namely things like minoxidil, whether that's topical or finasteride, very easy medications, well-tolerated medications that can help with that hair growth. But yes, there is likely a hormonal component. Now, there are some other hair conditions. I am not a dermatologist, but there are some other hair conditions that may have more of a pronounced loss of hairline. And that is something that would require you to see a dermatologist because it is progressive and not responsive to hormone therapy or the minoxidil treatments.
Hey, anybody else want to say anything here? Good. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Miller. And let's see, I'm going to scroll down. Lots of great comments here. I'm moving mostly towards the questions, but everyone, I encourage you to take a look into the chat.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
Hello, I'm the person. My name is Veronica Montut. I'm the person that puts in the question, but I have a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Is there anything besides topical medication? Is there anything that we can do where diet is concerned or the balancing of your hormones that can foster any, regrowth not more naturally than medication wise? Thank you.
It's kind of the things that I recommend for like just overall health And so we know that diet is very important, making sure that you're getting the appropriate micronutrients. So we're thinking about vitamin D, calcium. There is a push for collagen. I'll be curious to see what other folks on the panel say about increasing collagen use. I always have my patients with their collagen smoothies to see whether or not that would help with some hair growth. And just keeping things high protein, you need that for development of the actual hair growth. And that's generally what I recommend. And I know this is going to sound hokey, but this is a great time to learn stress mitigation, especially with menopause and moving more into that metabolic pattern of like increased cortisol, insulin resistance, things like that. And also just life in this midlife stage, having a lot of stress. We think about sandwich generation increases diagnosis of medical conditions during this phase, lots of different areas of life that's pulling you. Stress mitigation is really, really helpful, including sleep, and making sure that you're getting adequate sleep for what your needs are.
Thank you. Thank you again. Great question. Great question. Thank
Dr.
you.
Chris, I'm curious to see what you say in your practice.
I don't love hair loss because I ultimately have to tell people that hair loss is about aging and I can't make you stop aging. But what I do see in the chat is some discussion about maybe fear mongering and overuse of hormone therapy. And I want to respond to that because I think it's a more general question. So I really want to be able to respond to this because I feel like we finally have medical societies that are saying that it is appropriate without all these restrictions that were based on no facts, appropriate to treat people who are symptomatic and to acknowledge the experience that women have, the suffering that we undergo, and the way that we're expected to endure that suffering just because we should like suck it up and die now that we can't make babies anymore. So I think it's really important to also point out that even though then all the national menopause societies still are failing to make recommendations that we use hormones for prevention of disease, that the data actually show that hormone therapy is excellent at preventing disease. And I think that we still need to actually change these policies and move forward and actually offer the treatment to patients. There's a question in here saying from a participant who said she did not like feeling like hormone therapy was enforced upon her. And I would say that the difference between now in 2024 and probably 1984, when I might have started talking to patients, is that there was this very paternalistic attitude, like, we know what's best for you, dear. We're going to keep you from having heart attacks and fractures. Just take the hormones. No nuanced conversation, no, nothing else. And now I think that all of us really demand more from our providers. And by getting educated, not just from fora like these, but also from, podcasts, which are run by excellent physicians and providers who know the science, who attend the meetings and are going out there to give the information to people who have a 15-minute insurance visit. We're trying to arm those people with adequate information so that they can actually present it to their physician and advocate for themselves. I think it's always a personal decision. You don't need to actually do what your doctor tells you. I tell breast cancer survivors they don't have to take the adjuvant therapy. They should have a good conversation about what the pros and cons are and make a decision that suits them. And likewise, if I have a patient who really doesn't want to be on hormones for whatever reason, then we can have a nuanced, personalized conversation about what her risks are, what is her most bothersome symptom. I write in my chart MBS, its most bothersome symptom. What does the patient want from this visit and from the future of our relationship? To make sure that she's feeling like she's being heard and she's being treated. She's not just being handed something that everybody else got. I hope that addresses what you were saying, Lucia.
Yeah, I really appreciate that conversation because I do think that in the broader, and maybe again, my feed is all of my social media is all about menopause for the most part, but there is this sense of almost like doing menopause the right way. That if you're not on hormone therapy, you're not doing it the right way. If you're not eating X amount of fiber or protein or wearing the weighted vest or whatever it is, you're not doing your menopause the right way. And to your point, I think it's a more nuanced conversation about what your goals are. What do you want for your life? Regardless, I can say, hey, I think, especially for my patients who are, I would love to start you on hormone therapy. I know the prevention benefits, and I know that it's going to help relieve the symptoms that you have. but it's still a medication that you have to take. It's still something that you have to purchase and apply and ingest and all of those things. There's still work on your part to be able to do those things. And it becomes what is of value to you and what are your goals. And so I love having that nuanced conversation, recognizing that it's not a one size fits all when it comes to your menopausal journey and experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
I also want to add, oh, I was just going to add that one of the things that we noticed with the communities that we are building, women simply need education. They simply need to know, what are the questions I need to ask my doctor when I go to the doctor's office, right? What are the symptoms I'm looking for? Because some of them don't even know what the symptoms are. And that their decisions does not have to be based on, like you said, what the doctors tell them to do, that just get the information, collect information, gather data as much as you can, and make an informed decision. So some women are so scared because, again, of what they've heard about HRT. And so they don't even want to have the conversation. They don't even want to hear about HRT. But what, again, I've noticed is that when they are in an environment where they're taught about HRT, and then they get to weigh the odds between HRT or naturopathic, they're then able to weigh their options much more effectively and make a decision much more readily. But it's the lack of information that I feel is causing women harm.
Yeah. Lucia, I saw your hand up. Okay.
I'm not sure there's a lack of information. I almost feel like there's too much, and it's so hard to parse through it. And as for, I think you saw in the chat that HRT was imposed on me by my doctor when I was having no symptoms. And she was like, well, let's get you on it, let's cut this off at the pass. And she said it'll take about 3 months. And then 3 months in, I was like, okay, I'm swelling up and I have back pain and now I have hot flashes, whereas before I didn't. And I was like, nope, I do not like this. And I just weaned myself off. I started just slowly decreasing the amount. And what went through my head was, and this gets back to sort of the suffering part. Okay, I guess I have to choose my suffering. All right, I'm going to have some kind of symptoms either way, evidently. So I have to choose. Do I want like the natural menopause symptoms that eventually are going to start? Or do I want these symptoms that seem to have cropped up from the HRT? But I've got to choose one or the other. I'm not going to like skate through this either way. So it's like you just got to choose your hell. And it might not be hell, but you do have to, you're not going to get a free pass.
I like that, actually.
If someone could maybe address my question about groups where there's like a medical moderator, because it seems like you have the choice of managed care for 15 minutes or, paying a lot of money or, money for a personalized coach. And what about just like a group where there's a moderator and it's affordable or no cost? I haven't seen that.
We do that at Revival. We're once a month based on topics that like I provide a free forum for people to come for that very reason, because I think of it, there's a lot of information out there with not a lot of understanding. And in your situation, maybe, if you were having those symptoms, as a clinician, and that follow-up would be, let's work to help you kind of minimize some of those side effects and understand, like make those adjustments. And I feel like there was a real missed opportunity if that was something that you were interested in exploring and taking, that didn't happen for you. But in like the forums where you're in these informal groups with medical doctors, the podcast, all of those things, there is an opportunity to find community and ask those questions. So I would say it's not like kind of big groups. Maybe I know that there are some folks that have employer benefits. I'm thinking of things like
No, I
Raven
think it would need
Clinic.
to
I'm
be
thinking
like a
of like
small group. Yeah,
I'm
that
thinking of
sounds
things like
perfect. If
that where
anyone
you
has
can.
links that you can share maybe later with the group as a follow-up, like links for a Zoom group where they're kind of small and you can get questions asked, even if it's a small fee. I would love to. I'm sorry I spoke over you. That was, it was either rude or not rude. There are sociolinguists who say it's just style linguist. It's stylistic, whether it's considered rude, but I wasn't intending to be rude, Dr. Miller. Anyway, follow-up resources for links. I know I would appreciate it if anyone has them.
Yeah, and we'll get
I'll just say to that point, Lucia, we've actually something Elizabeth and I have talked about of how we can have these sort of conversations and forums of information for women. So thank you for bringing that up, because it actually shows us that this is something that would be it's really needed and would be really wanted. So we'll continue that conversation. Yeah. I want to get one more question. Oh, sorry, Elizabeth.
actually, I think from a timing, if we can move the next question to the because
Yeah, sure.
we want to, if it's okay with everybody. But I do want to say, to the point of Dr. Miller, Dr. Creatura, Denise, and Dixie, the comment around, and Lucia, the comment around, that's why we created Under the Hood of Women's Health. Every woman, we have perimenopause, we have all life stages from puberty, adolescence, reproductive years, but then we go into perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. And the point is that the more stories you hear from women who are going through these things at this life stage, along with experts like Dr. Taniqua Miller and Dr. Chris Creatura, Dr. Melissa Holmes, Dr. Andrea Braden, Dr. Bernie Russell, when you start, and Dr. Shiva Gofrani, when you start hearing these stories, and then you hear the physicians share their nuanced experience, how they're looking, how they're seeing this stage of life. The whole idea is that it helps impart and really help women go in with informed conversations. But I'm sorry, because I'm taking up time. I want to get to the next question. I'm going to move the order. I'm going to go to Denise. You founded T Botanics, which I think is amazing, and Wise Paws Wellness after personal experiences. And I just love this because, it's just amazing when we're inspired by our own things. Could you share the aha moments, Denise? What inspired you to both create the tea line that helps alleviate menopause symptoms, and then also what compelled you to create an educational platform for women at this stage, and share some of your personal experiences?
Yeah, sure. So my journey began, honestly, I've been in the entertainment business, like I said, 30 years, and my journey began when I got a hot flash. And I was like most women, caught off guard, very little knowledge. The difference, though, was at the time I was the vice president of the Medical Board of California, then became the president during my perimenopause years. And, if you know what that role is, I know the doctors do, it really means like I have access to doctors in my state. And yet I was not prepared at this life stage. And so that led me to first wanting to solve, my own severe hot flashes, which I was having them every hour. So I went from 0 to every hour through the night. And I, typically approach my health from a natural perspective first. We've lived as humans for a very long time without drug intervention. And so I try to seek that out from a personal standpoint. So I partnered with my doctor and we co-created T Botanics and came out with the first product, which was this one here, the Hot Flash Tea. And then that led me to really talking to women across the country and realizing that they were like me. And I wanted to bring them evidence-based information. And so we launched a platform in 2019 called Wise Paws Wellness, where doctors come, they speak to women directly all day at a summit. It's here in Los Angeles, from A to Z. So we talk about the hair, we get into some, more sensitive issues like incontinence and sex, wellness. We talked about stress a few minutes ago. The importance of all of these things, life stage, lifestyle, nutrition, movement. So we tried to cover the gamut of this issue. And then I was reading an article about femtech. And there was only one solution of the 15 solutions that were mentioned that had anything to do with women at midlife. And so I founded the Fem Aging Project, to get the tech community to start focusing on solutions that were specifically designed for women ages 40 plus. I meet with investors to learn more about this and learn more about the viability of this market. And then, as you know, I turned my attention to doing a documentary, and I met these two women out of New York who had also had a desire, and we decided to come together and join forces and try to look at how do we bring this issue to light in a way that was mass media driven, and that's something women and policymakers and physicians like the ones that are here today could use to make the case for why we need to all step up in society. So now we have women speaking up. We have doctors speaking out. There was a time when I first started doing this back in 2019, it was hard to get doctors to be upfront, to be forward facing, let me say that. One, because everybody's trying to, not be someone who becomes a target, and you could become a target. And for physicians, your license is really everything. It's what allows you to do the work that you do, and no one wants to have their license impacted. But now we are seeing physicians become bold and to talk and to be on, webinars like this to give women the actual information that they need. And so we are seeing now social media talking about it. More traditional media is talking about it. So, we are, just really behind this issue from a knowledge, a research, and a social stigma, perspective. And that's what we're trying to change. So that a hot flash led to all this. Like menopause was not on my brain on any level. But once this happened, I knew that I could utilize all my platforms to really raise this issue. And then the last thing just about the film, it has become accredited as a CME. So on Thursday, October 17th, the same day that the film comes out, we are doing a live webinar with doctors and nurses. And at the end of that webinar, they receive a 90-minute CME credit towards the renewal of their license. So media is impactful and it can be powerful.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And I just want to applaud you so much, Denise, for taking your personal experience with the hot flash and manifesting it into a call to action and a call to arms to really help support women in this life stage, like to create the tea, then to build the educational platform, to bring the community together is really something that should be celebrated. Dixie, I'm looking at you now because, right? Shouldn't this be celebrated? I mean,
Absolutely.
amazing.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the work you do because of the things you're doing. And I know it would probably be a little more natural that your community would hear first, but now that it's becoming more of a national conversation, I think it's going to be awesome. So thank you for that. I'm going to move, I'm switching the order. Dr. Creatura, I'm coming back to you. One of the things I've noticed with gynecologists is that you and OBGYNs, you typically grow up with your patients, if you will. And so you follow them through various life stages, in this case, perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. Can you define each life stage? This is really important to me because I feel like we talk about it, but menopause isn't a stage. So I want to hand this over to Dr. Creatura to describe it. And then also what led you to focus specifically on menopause and sexual health and what drives your passion for this area?
Thanks for that question. I think that growing up with patients, especially in the United States, because we lack a primary care and public health infrastructure, is really a privilege. It's not just a privilege for patients, it's a privilege for physicians because it allows us to provide more nuanced care, particularly with sexual health and pregnancy. We get the history that many practitioners don't get. But the continuity in care that would be present in an ideal system that I've been able to create with my very small practice is something that I think really ensures better outcomes and it increases trust. I chose this field to relieve female suffering and to support people with medical needs that don't affect men because the medical system doesn't actually focus on that. And I would say that menopause is really, it's arbitrarily defined as a year without menses, but it's really a 10 to 15 year neuroendocrine transition that impacts every part of the body, just like aging. It's not just a reproductive aging event. So we really have to be thinking about how the decline in ovarian function begins in the late 30s and early 40s with andropause, which is a decline in androgens. This is a shock to many women that I speak to because it's a surprise for them to know that women have more testosterone than they do estrogen, except in ovulation and possibly pregnancy. So I think that it's not really a specific phase, it's a continuum, right? the perimenopausal years that are leading up to the cessation of menses are associated with a lot of distressing symptoms in some women, not all. And menopause isn't over when you stop having periods, right? The decline in hormones continues to impact every part of the body, the heart, the brain, the genitals. It's not over till you're dead. So, I really want to say that hormones are not unnatural, right? It's unnatural for us to survive pregnancy. Half of us would have died in childbirth 120 years ago. So I don't like to say to women that it's unnatural for them to treat the endocrine decline any more than I would say it's natural for you just to ignore the possibility you could use insulin if your pancreas isn't working. And if you are having symptoms, I think that it's appropriate for you to get good science, evidence-based care and to have nuanced conversations with your physicians. I think that, the messages I'd really like to give people about taking care of women at all stages in their lives is that hormones are not dangerous, but you have to use them properly. Hormone therapy is not one thing. The dose, the delivery system, the timing all matters. And androgens are important. They're not male hormones. Hormones don't have gender. They're human hormones, and they have effects on women that are understudied and have to be addressed. And hormone therapy for us as providers is an opportunity to make an all systems intervention and prevent suffering and disease. And that's really what I want to do in my work. I saw that Dr. Parrott is here, and she was here. She's the CEO of Physicians for Reproductive Health, and we got to meet because of our advocacy surrounding abortion care. And we see a lot of the connections between misinformation surrounding abortion care and reproductive health, just as we do with menopause care. It's all connected.
Whoops, sorry, guys. Thank you for that, Dr. Creatura. I think that's really helpful to understand, and certainly the clinical. I'm going to hand it over to Amy. There's a couple questions that came in that weren't answered earlier that are a little connected to this.
Yeah, I'd like to jump over to Becky. Becky has a question, and she says, for those women who were impacted by the WHI study, including me, what options now exist? And Becky, if you want to elaborate on that, please feel free to open up your mic.
Yeah, I think again, if you've never been put on hormone therapy and you're over 60, is that even an option for you any longer?
I would say yes, but again, you have to look at the whole picture. Like, what's your most bothersome symptom? What's the state of your cardiovascular system? What's going on with your brain? What's your family history? Are you at risk for dementia? Are you at risk for cardiovascular disease? What are your bones like? Or do you have any contraindications? There isn't any one size fits all answer to that. But what I would object to is the idea that there's a certain point, and many people kind of arbitrarily use 60 because they think of 50 as the end of menses, at which hormones will no longer benefit you. Well, it's true from what we know that the more remote you are from menopause, the less disease prevention benefit you're likely to get. But we haven't actually studied using transdermal estradiol, which has the best metabolic effects remote from menopause. The WHI study showed a slight increase in certain types of events like clots and strokes in older women who are on an oral formulation that we rarely use. There's never been a study taking women remote from menopause just using transdermal estradiol and natural progesterone. There might be a lot of benefit, but the study's not been done, and I'm worried that it won't be done in this country.
And I think we also, like, for patients of mine who have osteopenia, when I think of bone health and the impact of having a hip fracture on mortality, 3 to 5% risk of mortality at that episode, or even loss of independence. So having significant morbidity, over 80% needing some sort of assisted care, unable to live independently. That's a big deal for my patients. And so as we're screening, just as an example for bone health, yes, we know that estrogen is actually FDA approved, if we want to stay within the FDA approvals, for the prevention or in the treatment of osteopenia, but for the prevention of osteoporosis. So I think in that situation, if I have somebody who is at that higher risk, then yeah, I think that that is a great way to support bone health in addition to all of the things that we otherwise counsel about vitamin D and calcium. But again, it's a nuanced conversation weighing risk and benefit. And so I wouldn't say, depending on what your risk are, that you're completely out of it. It really requires a conversation. And that's just one example. We haven't even touched on genital urinary syndrome, which I feel like we can give everybody vaginal estrogen.
Sharon has a question kind of in this realm too that I'm gonna jump over to. What are your thoughts on natural herbal therapies versus hormone therapy from an efficacy and safety point of view? And what are the different forms of hormone therapies, advantages and disadvantages? For example, tablets, patches, gels, etc. And Sharon, feel free to jump in too.
Well, I think it's a really complicated answer. So what I would say is that's like a whole seminar in and of itself, with all the things that we would have to answer in that question. But again, I would just stress that I don't think hormones should be considered unnatural. We're basically giving you the same molecule that your ovary made for most of your life. So I don't think of that as being an unnatural intervention. There are lots of herbs and dietary supplements and even food stuffs and I'm sure teas that have pharmaceutical effects and also hormonal effects because they bind to receptors in the body. The problem with a lot of dietary supplements is that they're not well studied. So I think we have an obligation as healthcare practitioners to be sure that we're using treatments that have evidence-based rationales, and sometimes we do have to wing it a little bit because we don't have the science that we want, but we don't want to experiment on patients. We want to make sure that we don't cause harm and that we do have efficacy.
Great. Thank you for that. That's great. Now, Sharon, do you feel that answered your question? Are you good?
I was just, the reason I brought it up was because a lot of herbal supplements can also have side effects. And I know someone asked earlier about it. So I just wanted to address that, as you said, they're not studied as well as pharmaceuticals. And so I just thought, the general consensus is, oh, let's use something like a herb, but then it does, that you need to really look into that, the efficacy and the safety of it, because sometimes they might not be as effective and they might be no safer than a prescribed medication.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And that's great. That's great. And thanks, Dr. Creatura, for the answer. I'm going to move over to Dixie. We have two more questions and then we can open up again. Two more questions to ask our panelists. And then, of course, we'll open up for more questions from you. Dixie, is a longtime wellness advocate. How has your approach to health influenced your own experience with perimenopause and postmenopause? And also, how has your wellness journey shaped your perspective throughout the menopause transition? I love this, the way I just said this based on what Dr. Creatura was speaking about and Dr. Miller, but I was just thinking about that endocrine transition. So if you'd share that.
I have to say, at every juncture, it's been transitions because similar to Dr. Taniqua, I left my teaching job. I resigned for a self-care sabbatical. I just couldn't do it anymore. It just wasn't the thing that brought me joy. It was not my passion. But I continued to teach in a different capacity. I continued coaching and I continued consulting and teaching workshops, etc. And then I founded the Inside Out of Beauty Market, which was a small beauty retailer. But I'd say that throughout all of those experiences, I was led by my curiosity, by my awareness, tapping into what my body was becoming aware of. And sometimes you just don't know, you just know that something's changing, something doesn't feel the same. And exploring that, being very curious about that. What is it? Asking questions. And if you can't identify what it is, then seeking help, finding people who can support you. But if you can't, dig deeper. Ask yourself some questions like, what am I feeling? Is this normal for me? Is this how my body functions, right? So I love to use like 3 what I call a triple A framework with my clients. And that is being in awareness, be in awareness of the sensations that you're feeling in your body and acknowledge that those sensations are happening and then take action. Because if you're not in awareness and you're not in acknowledgement, then what are you taking action against, right? So my curiosity led me to that, led me to this awareness, acknowledgement, and action. And as a result, I found answers. I asked questions and I found answers. And I continue to learn because everything changes, right? So impermanence was a huge part of the lessons that I learned, that everything changes. And I have to say that I went through several different changes at the same time. So it was menopause, and then I became an empty nester and closed my business. So then there was that transition. So all of these three transitions were happening at the same time. And my body was just like, what is going on? Right. And again, so leaning into community, being curious about what was happening, taking the time out to address what I acknowledged by taking the action that I needed to take. And so through all of it, community was the thing that really brought me healing. And I don't want to say I'm healed, I'm constantly healing, but it was my community that I turned to, the doctors that are a part of my community, the teachers that are a part of my community, the elders that are a part of my community, the younger people that are a part of my community, and the intergenerational conversations that I'm having with them. All of that community brought me to this place where I am now, where I feel well in the moment, right? But I know things can change and my body's continually changing. And I continue to be curious. I continue to ask questions. I continue to share my stories, and I continue to provide a safe place of support with my business partner through Life in the Pause for people who don't have the information that they need. And earlier I said that there is not enough information. I think a lot of people take for granted that in the Black community, there is information and there is lots of information. There might be a lot of information circulating, but a lot of times Black women don't have access to the information, right? We know that there are a lot of socioeconomic disadvantages that Black women face. And I can refer back to the SWAN study, right? This study of women across the nation. And there is, what they found where Black women are concerned is very alarming, right? The cardiovascular issues and the health disparities that they have can lead to poorer quality of life, right, throughout this menopausal experience because their experience is very different from their white counterparts. So there is information out there, but not everybody has access to the information, and the community piece of it is it's what we utilize to bring people together and have that information accessible to folks. So I think being in this space at this particular time has brought meaning to my life, in a way that I was worried about, like, what am I going to do after I close my business? But somehow, some way, the universe sort of conspired and brought me to this place. And we're able to have this resource that we now have to share with others. And I feel like, as my body continues to change, as this experience continues to change, I'm just going to continue again to lean into curiosity, lean into learning, lean into community so that I can navigate, because I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that I need resources to navigate. And my community is a huge resource for navigating.
I love that. I thank you for sharing that. I think what I heard loud and clear was listen to your body was the beginning of it. And if women,
Sure.
regardless of where we are on any sort of, whether from a diversity, from an age, whatever, if we listen to our bodies and follow that, I think that that's really important. But the other thing, getting back, Dixie, to the community you're building and sharing, you've been curating information, educating through curation. And I think I'm looking at Denise and Taniqua, Dr. Miller, and I'm thinking about the fact that you guys creating this community because people want trusted sources. You guys become trusted sources, and so I think it's really important not to underestimate the power that you have to go out there, not just have a voice, but be that role model, So when I hear you speak about this, Dixie, and I think about you as, the co-founder of Life in the Pause, but the way you show up with your life, the way self-care is at the core of everything you do. I mean, that is a discipline that, is something that you can role model. So I think, thank you for sharing that. I think it's great. I love Life in the Pause and everything you're doing. And we will, look forward to co-creating and collaborating. I'm very excited about that. I have one more question and then we'll open everything up for Dr. Miller. And, Dr. Miller, you've been doing amazing work. You're a midlife health expert and the founder of a telemedicine company called Revival. What inspired you to start this venture? And, what gaps in care were you aiming to address? And then, let me ask the one additional part. So, additionally, what other factors during this stage of life, the peri, the menopause, the post, can make navigating menopause more challenging? And, how are you solving for that?
I know you've been here from the beginning of the conception of Revival to launching Revival. I was in academic medicine for over 10 years, but before then, I was trained as an OBGYN resident in the United States and had very little exposure, despite my training program having a midlife center and having leadership from the North American Menopause Society. Other than the obligatory lecture or two, really didn't have a lot of exposure to menopause. Which struck me about menopausal medicine, and this, as we say this, I love this neuroendocrine transition, is that the interventions, if you will, supplementation, as we call it, is so easy and it's so benign and safe. And yet we don't prescribe, we don't offer treatment, we don't even offer the conversation. But when we do, it is life changing for patients. And so, very early on, after I left residency, was exposed to more and more patients. Unfortunately, in residency, you get really good obstetrical care, you get really good gynecologic surgical training, but not really a lot of menopausal health. And so made my way into the world of menopause. And at the time at Emory, there were only 3 other physicians who were actually NAM certified in a city like Atlanta. So I became number 4 and really became a champion of building out a menopausal health practice at Emory. So what I'm witnessing now as I've left my academic practice is this what I call the menopause renaissance. There is so much discussion. We have this amazing film that I viewed today and absolutely loved and enjoyed so much. And there's so much information, but not a lot of understanding. And it is centering very privileged voices in the conversation around menopause. So as Dixie was talking about SWAN, and we know the impact that menopause has for different groups of women, including women of color, Black women, and that their symptomatology tends to be more intense. They have symptoms for a longer period of time. And despite that, may not walk out of the office with a prescription for anything, even if there's a conversation had. That's troubling to me. And so Revival was born out of this idea that you don't need fixing, that you are inherently worthy and good as you are. And this next phase shouldn't be tolerated, can be healed, and you can talk about your bothersome symptoms, but looking at you as the more holistic person, the whole person that's going to come out of the other side of this and really find purpose and meaning in this next third of your life. And so part of the idea was also centering diverse voices. So really centering in imagery, copy, the women of color. We haven't really talked about queer women or non-binary people. I see lots of those patients. And when I'm at conferences held by these societies and they say HRT means husband replacement therapy, well, that doesn't really include my patient who doesn't have a husband and is not having penetrative intercourse. Where is she or they in the conversation? When I think of the role of weight bias in medicine, that when I have patients who are having pretty significant hot flashes and they're coming to care and the doctor tells them to lose weight. Well, okay. And how am I going to treat these hot flashes that are disrupting my sleep? How am I going to treat my irritability? How am I going to get that energy and that motivation to do the things that I already know I need to do? Where are those patients in the conversation? Where are disabled patients in the conversation? So really focusing the practice on those that I consider to be really on the margins of this menopause renaissance. And that really was the inspiration for Revival, which comes from the Latin word meaning to live again.
Mm. Well, thank you for that. First of all, I applaud you. I think it's great. I've spent a lot of time. It's interesting. Dr. Creatura has been my gynecologist. I spent a lot of time with Dr. Miller talking about all these phases through interviews and, through the business that we're creating. And it's really has been so exciting and thrilling to watch you build this practice and bring these women into the mix. And I've been saying I think it's wonderful that you care for women of color, but I think everybody will want access to you. Everybody will want access to Dr. Creator. You guys are doing amazing things. And I think the commonality here is 20 years apart, different experiences, but both of you getting into nuanced conversations with your patients. And I think that this has been very interesting from the different perspectives of all the women here, is the nuances in menopause at each stage of menopause, from community, from cultural, from just the physical symptomology. I'm going to hand it over to Amy to see if anybody has any questions. And if
we do have a couple more questions over here from a little bit earlier. Carla has a question. Can you speak to current research into menopause and perimenopause therapies that are under development or in the pipeline?
There's a number of non-hormonal interventions that are being researched and explored, particularly in the United States, because a lot of pharmaceutical research is guided by trying to find a novel molecule that people can make a killing off of. So some of the things that we actually use every day, or maybe Dr. Miller doesn't, but I use androgens, and we need to start using androgens for women. And there's no FDA approved androgen for women aside from DHEA suppositories, which when we finally prescribe them, nobody can get it covered anyway. So we're really kind of stuck in the United States because of the way that our healthcare system is structured. But there are medications that will specifically address specific things. There are bone medications that help with prevention of fracture. There are drugs that help with hot flashes, but don't have any benefit for your cardiovascular system that we know of. There are obviously antidepressants and psychotropic drugs that can affect people's sleep. But I think what we really end up with in midlife is a lot of polypharmacy. When we could just replace people's hormones and not give them 5 drugs, we could just give them the estrogen and the progestin and hopefully the androgens that they need. That could be considered one drug if somebody would develop it that way. But I think there's an opportunity for many pharmaceutical companies to explore other options that would create an opportunity to make a lot of money. It's not always the best thing for the patient. And maybe Dr. Miller has some other promising things that I've ignored.
Well, I do believe that they're opening up trials again for our androgen patches. Did I hear that at our most recent conference?
I think that if you're talking about the testosterone patch, there may be trials, but there's a lot of movement. Most drug companies aren't interested in trying to get something approved that won't make them a fortune. And since there's nothing proprietary about testosterone, there's not a great deal of motivation. There are drugs that mix testosterone with other drugs, like testosterone with Buspar and testosterone with PDE5 inhibitors, like Librido and Libridos. These are drugs that have been in development for 15 years. And if you go to Ishwish, you'll hear about them all the time. But these are drugs that are mixing testosterone with something else to make a novel compound.
Make it novel.
Thank you. Did that answer your question, Carla?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay. Great. We have another great question over here from Seema. She says, I was just diagnosed with ADHD at 44. Any comments on your experiences with the ADHD diagnosis later in life for women? Oh, I believe perimenopause exacerbated my ADHD and the hormones that I was relying on were no longer enough to cope. And Seema, please feel free again to open your mic if you'd like.
Yeah, I think my comment has enough information. Thank you, Amy. Yeah,
Okay.
this has been like a light bulb moment for me because I have been putting together puzzle pieces from my childhood and realizing that I have never been neurotypical, and but something about turning 40, just like it was just a shit show from then, so it's been really hard. So But now I feel like I have a little bit more clarity on why that may be, and I feel a hope as well. But would love to hear any comments from the experts on the panel on your experiences and any resources that may be available in the public domain.
Yeah, I see this quite commonly in my practice. And the way that I consider it, I think many we're learned from very early ages how to develop tools to cope with our neurotypical behaviors or even our depressive symptoms or anxiety symptoms. But when we start experiencing those hormonal transitions, those fluctuations and declines, what tools we had to be able to kind of get by, if you will, or to compensate for some of those deficiencies, they just no longer become useful for us as in the same way. So I'll have lots of patients, for example, who may have had a history of postpartum depression or anxiety and maybe had treatment for a while and things were going along, and then something in their baseline changes. And what I want to say is that trust yourself. Trust your body. I think going back to what Dixie said about awareness, know what's different for you. I'll also have patients who are on active treatment for ADHD or for depression or anxiety, and something shifts. They're like, this is no longer working. My routine regimen, the thing that has kept me steady and stable for the last however many years, something is different. And for a lot of my patients who may be early 40s and not really thinking about perimenopause at all on the radar, that's sometimes one of the first clues that I have as their clinician to say, hey, tell me a little bit more about what other symptoms you're exploring or are experiencing. And so, yeah, I'm happy that you had that diagnosis. I think that you may have reached that tipping point where all of the tools that you developed throughout your life to cope with inattention or hyper what have you really kind of ran out. And I'm happy that you have that diagnosis and have that hormonal support right now.
Thank you.
I will just say that's super helpful to hear. Dr. Miller, I love your explanation on that. Thank you. I got a lot from that. Thank you for that question, Seema. Oh, Elizabeth, you're on mute.
I think it's so interesting, this phase of life, because I'll give you for example, when I was going through perimenopause, I don't know, a little over 10 years ago, I got a call from Dr. Creatura. I went in for my annual, I got my blood workup, and she called me. She said, there's something, your thyroid's a little off. It looks like you're you have hyperthyroiditis. And I said, well, how long do I have to get to a specialist? I was like, without doing the research, and I'm in healthcare and stuff. And I got a little nervous, but this is all based on perimenopause, my autoimmune system, and there was anxiety, there was other things, stress and what have you. My autoimmune system went against me. And the reason why I'm sharing that is, like ADHD, it's different because it can pop up. But I think that finding it in the perimenopause phase, we don't realize how life can change. And back to Dixie's comment, is being really listening to your body and leaning in, that curiosity and understanding that change. I'll be honest with you, I didn't lean into that. I just wanted a cure. I just wanted to, how do I get healthy? How can I keep going with my life? I was burning out. I didn't quit. I should have quit at that time, but I just kept going and trying to treat it. And so I think that this has been a really interesting conversation, because just hearing these stories, both from expert, clinicians who can talk about the stories in the nuanced ways from a clinical perspective, but also from Dixie and Denise having created these products and these companies to serve this population, to say it's time we have these conversations and we acknowledge, what we're going through. It is a movement, right? Menopause is not having its moment. It's a movement. And movements happen when we each take or have an active voice in the conversation. So thank you all so much for tonight. I don't know if anybody has any more questions, but I just want
One more question. Yeah, I want to get to one last question from Carrie. Our personalities, emotional regulation, decision-making is so inherently tied into our hormones and our cycle. Speaking from a perimenopausal place, how do we manage the menopause whilst being mindful of identity and what feels like the authentic me during this transitional stage when we are no longer cyclical? Love this question.
Good question.
Who wants to go first?
Chris or Taniqua? Dr.
Well, I want
Creatura?
to hear a different perspective. I'm thinking of my coaching hat, what happens in terms of identity as you're going through perimenopausal transition. I think that, again, I said it a little bit earlier, we are conditioned from very young ages to play certain roles in our families, in society, the hats that we wear. And when you start experiencing hormonal changes and transitions that impact mood, that impact ability to rest, that impact your physical body, how you see yourself, I think it could be, like I said, very disembodying. And so I always start with the question, my framework really helps people like to go back. Sometimes we have to go back to that purest form of who we are. I always like to go back to the little Taniqua who at the age of 12 changed my name. True story. I literally changed my name on my eighth grade diploma because that was my identity. And it was this bold and this brave girl who really took life by the horns. And through conditioning and training as a physician, I emerged into perimenopause a very different person. But as the irritability increased, the hot flashes, started to occur, I had to literally physically stop and I start asking my question, who am I? Who is this person? And the only place that I was able to find solace was back in that version of me. Who was she and who would she recognize me today? And so I start there with my coaching clients so that they can get grounded in who they are and not the many like masks that they've had to wear throughout their, teenage lives or their adult lives. And it's a wonderful opportunity while you're experiencing all of these physical symptoms or emotional symptoms that go into perimenopause and menopause and beyond to go back to that place. So as you're trying to manage, I always say go back to who you were, which I know may be challenging, but I felt like that was the purest form for many of my patients and my clients as for coaching.
I love that. I love that remembering the bold part of ourselves, that younger, bold part that was just inherently there at such a young age. Thank you.
And I also love the fact that it's like, owning our roar at this stage of life,
Yeah.
running to the roar. I just like love that. And I'm sitting here with all of everybody in this room, and this is a life stage. This is a phase, and our voices matter, and these experiences are real, and supporting each other and being educated and creating community. I keep looking at Dixie. It's just so important, and having that voice, Denise. So thank you so much, Jamila. Thank you for an amazing conversation. Does anybody, we ran 15 minutes over. I was trying to get it down to 75 minutes. I knew this conversation would be so provocative. But thank you so much for joining. We are going to have our November event will be under the hood of caregiving. And we will feature two attorneys, both one's a daughter of a mother she's been caring for a very young age, an attorney who is a special needs parent. We will have a physician, Dr. Miller will talk about her caregiving for her mother, and another caregiver from Morocco who lost her sister and who was caregived in her community. So she'll be sharing. That'll be November 13th. It'll be at 1 p.m. for the people in Europe. We're trying to come up with a new time just to make it available to everybody. But I hope that you'll join and take a look at our Under the Hood of Women's Health. Actually, every single woman on this panel has spoken at a very various life stage. And of course, Dr. Miller and Dr. Creatura with their clinical and medical expertise on perimenopause, menopause, and post. Thank you.